Here's a strange fact to sit with. Almost every civilization that has ever existed is already gone, and the few that seem to still be standing, America, the European Union, China, aren't even the same civilizations that stood on that ground a few centuries ago. They're new machines, rebuilt out of the wreckage of older ones that fell, sometimes in a blaze, sometimes so slowly nobody noticed the floor giving way until they were already in the basement. Look at the roll call. Around 1200 BCE, a whole cluster of Bronze Age powers, Mycenae, the Hittites, the trading city of Ugarit, the kingdoms of the Levant, went dark within a few decades of each other. Rome bled out over a century. The Tang Dynasty ended after nearly 300 years of glory. The Khmer who built Angkor Wat faded away. The classic Maya emptied their cities. The Mongols, who held the largest connected empire in history, cracked apart barely a lifetime after their peak. So there's a pattern, obviously. The real question is whether it's actually a pattern, some shared engine underneath all these collapses, or whether we're just staring at winners and losers and inventing a story to connect them. And the honest answer, once you dig in, is both. Every collapse is a fingerprint, unique. But underneath the fingerprints, the same bones keep showing up, so reliably across such different times and places that they can't be an accident. Let's go through them. First, what does collapse even mean? Not vibes, something you can measure. Central authority dissolves, trade routes go quiet, cities empty out, writing shrinks or vanishes, and usually the population itself craters. This isn't poetic exaggeration. The Maya walked away from cities that had held tens of thousands for centuries. Roman cities lost so many people they wouldn't recover for 1,000 years. You can see it in the soil. This is data, not legend. The first recurring bone shows up almost everywhere, the complexity trap. Every growing civilization gets more complicated. Bigger territory needs more bureaucrats, longer borders need bigger armies. Complexity is how a society solves its problems, but, and the archaeologist Joseph Tainter nailed this, every layer has to be paid for, forever. And the returns shrink over time. The first fort, huge payoff. The 5,000th, barely any. Eventually you hit a wall. Maintaining what you've already built costs more than building anything new gets you. And you can't grow out of it because growth needs more complexity, which now costs more than it produces. You're stuck, fine, until a shock hits. A drought, a plague, a lost war. Suddenly you can't afford your own complexity. Something fails. And that thing was holding up 3 others, which failed too. The cascade feeds itself, and the mighty permanent-looking civilization turns out to be a house of cards. Watch it in the Bronze Age. Ugarit was pulling tin from as far as Afghanistan to make bronze, and bronze was everything. When the supply chain broke, the very connection that made them powerful became the thing that killed them. Every palace depended on every other palace, so when enough fell, all of them fell. Second bone, the environment. A civilization isn't floating above nature, it's inside it, totally dependent on it. And here's the trap. Societies reshape their land to boost output now in ways that quietly wreck it later. They clear the forests, drain the rivers, farm the soil past its limits. The Maya are the textbook case. They stripped the lowlands bare. Building those limestone temples burned enormous amounts of wood, and feeding a growing population cleared more forest than the thin soil could sustain. Fewer trees meant less rain and more heat. Droughts got worse, and lakebed sediment shows a serious dry spell landing exactly when the cities were abandoned. But that drought wasn't an outside villain. The Maya had made their own land fragile with their own hands, then grown a civilization that depended on food the wrecked landscape couldn't deliver. The collapse lived in that collision, and it shows up in enough places to be a design flaw, not bad luck. Third bone, the people at the top take too much. Every complex society runs on surplus squeezed from the working population. But the elites who control that extraction always have a reason to grab a bigger slice, more wealth, more influence, more loyalty to buy. So their cut just keeps climbing. The problem is what that does underneath. Tax a farmer past his limit and his land produces less. Let the roads rot because the surplus went to palaces and the whole base erodes. The extraction machine devours the thing that feeds it. Peter Turchin's data traces this with unsettling consistency. Too many elites clawing at a pie that isn't growing reliably produces instability, then infighting, then sometimes collapse. Fourth bone, the quiet one. Knowledge is more fragile than it looks. A civilization stores its complexity in its experts, its records, its schools. And under real stress, population falling, the surplus drying up, that knowledge can vanish in a single generation, and you can't rebuild it from scratch fast enough to stop the collapse it triggers. Rome shows this brutally. The Romans knew how to build roads, aqueducts, mass-produce concrete, coordinate huge crews to exact standards. After the fall, that knowledge didn't survive, the aqueducts crumbled, and the reason nobody rebuilt wasn't a lack of stone, it was the loss of the organizational know-how that vanished the moment the administration carrying it fell apart. Here's one the popular version skips: disease, not background noise, the trigger. Rome got hit twice, plagues landing exactly as its weaknesses were stacking up, hollowing out the tax base, the army, and the farm labor all at once. But there's a twist. The Black Death was so devastating it broke feudalism, and strangely for the better. So many workers died that the survivors gained leverage they'd never had, helping clear the ground for the modern world. So disease doesn't have one simple effect. Hit a society with nothing in reserve and it accelerates the fall. Hit one with slack left and it can force a painful reinvention. The difference is how much reserve you had when the shock came. Now the part the textbooks skip, what collapse felt like from inside. People never experience it as one dramatic event. They experience it as things getting slightly worse, roads fixed less often, prices creeping up, bandits getting bolder, and every one of those had a reasonable local explanation. Nobody connected them. That's not stupidity, it's how complex systems fail. They're built to absorb small failures without setting off alarms. That's what makes them tough in good times. But near the limit, that same quality hides the stress, right up until the system crosses a threshold and the whole cascade fires at once. By the time it's obvious, it's too late. And here's the cruelest part. These societies didn't fall because the problems were invisible. Plenty of people saw them. They fell because their politics made fixing them impossible. The people who benefit most from things staying the same are the ones with the most power over the response and the most to lose from real change. Cutting complexity, sharing the surplus, protecting the future, every fix that would prevent collapse also weakens the most powerful people in the room. So it becomes gridlock, where those with the most power to change course have the most reason not to. Which brings us to now. Our civilization is the most complex and most connected in history. Supply chains wrapping the whole planet, so tight a snag in one node ripples through in days. Just look at 2020. Our environmental footprint dwarfs the Mayas. Inequality has climbed for half a century, and our knowledge sits in fragile, specialist hands, wired so tightly a failure can cascade faster than anything before. None of this means we're doomed. The pattern isn't a law, it's a warning. Because what saved the civilizations that declined gracefully instead of shattering was adaptive capacity, shedding complexity on purpose, changing course before the damage became permanent, sharing the surplus, protecting the knowledge. And none of that is a mystery. Every great civilization that fell left behind an instruction manual for exactly how it happened. So the real question was never whether collapse is inevitable. It isn't. The real question is whether the civilizations that came after ever bothered to read what the ones before them wrote down. And the record on that, to put it gently, is mixed.